Weddings are expensive. How can you keep the cost affordable? Or should you just elope and use the money for a down payment on a house? I've got a first-time guest to discuss it. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome to Debt Free in 30. Let's get started. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Jessica Bishop, and I'm the founder of a website called thebudgetsavvybride.com. It's a very extensive resource to help couples plan a beautiful and a meaningful wedding on a budget that they can actually afford.
Fantastic, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So I think this is something like episode number 498 of our little podcast here. So I've done almost 500 episodes, and most of the time, I'm the expert. I know what we're talking about. I got to tell you, I know nothing about weddings. I got married 28 years ago, and even then I didn't do any of the planning. So I'm not a wedding expert. I did go
typical groom.
Exactly. Fantastic. I stayed out of the way. Everything went great. So I did go to 3 weddings in the last 6 months. So I've, been to a wedding, and they're different now than 28 years ago. But here's what I do know. I have dealt with a number of clients over the years who got into financial trouble, and I say, so what happened? And they say, oh, well, it all started when we got married, and it cost a lot of money, and we incurred a lot of debt, and here we are. So what we're going to talk about today is practical advice to prevent that from happening, which is why you're on the show. So I want to start. First question is, this is an impossible question. You're not going to be able to answer it, but I'm going to ask it anyways because my show, I can do whatever I want. So my question is, what does a wedding cost? So what's the range?
Well, if you ask the big media wedding publications, their national averages that they report are around $30,000 in the US. But I say you can plan a wedding on any budget. It just might look different depending on how much money you have to spend.
Okay, and 30,000 sounds like a big number. Okay, and again, as I said, I'm married, so obviously I'm in favor of getting married, but wouldn't it be better to just live common law, elope, save the 30 grand, use it towards a down payment for a house?
Yeah, of course. And I think everyone's priorities and personal values are different. And depending on your own or, the couple's, situation, like they could absolutely make that choice. But it's something that we're actually discussing a lot on our podcast, which is called the Bouquet Toss this season, is why are we still having weddings when they're so expensive? And the truth is that they're a really meaningful moment and a transition and a celebration in your life. And we get so few of those. And that is worth marking with some sort of celebration, even if it does cost you a little bit of money. But I definitely don't recommend taking on debt to pay for one.
Yeah. And the wedding, you're exactly right. It's a transition in life. And I don't think the wedding's the hard part. I think it's all this, maybe not hard is the wrong word, but it's all the stuff leading up to the wedding. Because you got all the planning and, well, I want the plates to be blue and you want them to be green and we want to do this, we want to do that, we have it here. And I think working through all of that stuff and having all the pre-parties and all that, like if you can get through all that, then you're probably set up for the rest of your life pretty well. Whereas if you don't have any kind of wedding at all, well, I guess you haven't gone through the fire and maybe that, impacts what the future looks like. So, okay. One other question that just pops into my head here. I know I got a script here, but I don't care about the script.
Throw it at me.
Yeah, forget it. So, I don't know if you follow the news or not, but March of 2020, bunch of stuff happened in the world. We're not going to discuss it here because we don't want to talk about it. But there was a period of time where at least in our part of the world, there were no in-person weddings because you couldn't do that. So now that we are back to quasi-normal, how has the wedding world changed, or has it?
Yeah, I think the impacts of everything that happened in 2020 and the last few years has kind of given couples permission to reevaluate like what's actually important to them, right? When events were restricted and couples were forced to either postpone their wedding celebrations or downsize them to just their closest family and friends when they were allowing like very tiny gatherings. A lot of couples chose that option and they just had a very small micro wedding in their backyard because they still wanted to get married on that special day that they had chosen. And I think seeing that happen and so many couples saying, you know what, like this was good enough for us. Like we don't need to do the big wedding, or some couples did choose to still have the bigger celebration later. But I think what it did was just show people that there are options and that you don't have to do things the traditional way. And it sort of gave them permission to choose their own path. And if that meant saving and doing something small, eloping or having a micro wedding, they feel more empowered to do that.
Yeah, because I guess in the old days, like 5 years ago would be the old days. You had to have
lifetimes.
That's right.
Right.
It's been a generation in the last 4 years. It's like, well, if you're getting married, you got to invite all the friends and all the family, and if there's not 500 people at the wedding, then what's the point? Whereas now that we've gone through, your phrase micro weddings, it's like, okay, well, that's what other people have done, so it's not that crazy that I'm thinking about it doing. So I like your phrase that it gives you permission to reevaluate the process. So how would you define a micro wedding? That's just a limited number of people?
Yeah, I think it's actually a term that was coined by The Knot, which is the biggest, wedding media conglomerate in the world. And I think they define it as any wedding with 30 guests or fewer. So yeah, that's I think what is considered a micro wedding.
And even 30 guests is still not, it's still
it's not tiny.
It's not
by
tiny,
any means.
exactly.
I think like even an elopement could include a few additional people, like maybe just your parents and siblings. But yeah, so all of the terms I think are flexible, but I think that's how they define it.
Okay, so let's get into the whole practical stuff here. And that is, how am I going to save money? How am I going to save money? How am I going to save money? So walk me through your process. So if I come to you and I say, okay, I want to plan a wedding, which my wife will be really offended by because I'm already married. But let's say somebody listening says, okay, I want to get married, but I want to do it as, I want a great wedding, but I also want it to be as cost effective as possible. So let's start at the very least expensive way that I could still do something good. And then we can sort of go up from there. So maybe we're talking about a micro wedding, maybe like, I don't know, how would I do it with as little cost as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think the standard process that I always recommend, and this is very clearly like outlined in my book, by the way, is really sitting down with your partner and discussing, not just what you want for this wedding, but what you want for your life in the future. We're talking like the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. What's on your life goal roadmap beyond this wedding? Because you need to put this celebration and the financial cost of it in context of like what is coming next and what other savings goals you have coming up. So I think it really just helps to put that in context before you begin deciding how much you're going to spend and planning anything. Then
so just on that point,
sure.
So what you're saying is we should actually have a chat. We should kind of have some communication here. And if the bride says, well, I'd really like to be buying a house and I'd like to be having kids. And the husband says, well, I guess that would be the groom would be the proper term because they're not married yet. Well, I'd really like to travel and I'd really like to have a big, pickup truck and all the rest of it because that's how men talk, right? Then, okay, we've only got limited money here. And so it may be that by actually talking about it, you both kind of agree, you know what? Maybe spending a bit less on the wedding frees up more for the future. That's what you're describing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exercise in prioritization, communication, teamwork. Like if you can plan a wedding together, and navigate all of these things, the financial aspects, the emotional aspects, the family, the societal pressure, all of it, the logistics. That's like really great training for marriage. Yep. I always say. So the wedding planning process can be, a period of growth because you're working together as a team and making these decisions based on your priorities. And sometimes that means compromising on certain things, just like within your marriage.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's excellent practice for the future. When my wife and I got married, maybe this was just before or just after, I can't remember, but we decided to put a hardwood floor in the entryway of where we were living. And, that turned out to be a disaster. And so we learned from that exercise that we hire people who know how to do that sort of thing. So you gotta practice in order to learn what the future is going to be. So, okay. So we've had this discussion and we've decided that, yeah, there are other priorities we have, but we still want to have a good wedding. So walk me through the next step in the process then.
Yeah. So next step would be really figuring out what type of wedding you envision and what sort of, vibe. Do you want it to be large? Do you want a lot of guests there? Do you have a large number of family and friends that you want included? Or do you picture something more intimate and maybe laid back? Having those discussions is really important just about the vision for your day. And then that helps you sort of start to understand what potential costs could be. And there's some really great resources that couples can check out. There's one called, I think it's costofwedding.com or Wedding Report. It might actually be the same site these days, but you can get some data on like what the average costs are in your area, which can be really helpful. And also, sitting down and looking honestly at your finances. What do you have personally saved in your savings account that you are willing to allocate to this celebration? And what does your partner have? And then also having those conversations with your family, right? Because oftentimes the families are still contributing financially in some way, but there's always sort of like the caveat to that is that when your families are contributing financially, they're also going to want to contribute their opinions onto what you should do. So all of this is like really, really important in terms of communication. It's just a lot of conversations and sometimes awkward and difficult ones, but just getting really clear on, what financially you have to work with between the two of you and your family contributions, if any. And also what you could potentially save throughout your engagement period to put towards the wedding. Yeah. And that kind of makes up that total number of what you can realistically afford to spend without taking on debt.
Yeah, and you raised an excellent point there about families' opinions, because I agree. If I'm the father of the bride or the groom and I'm kicking in 10 grand, well, then I want to have, I want, my kind of meal or something like that. I mean, I wanted to do it this way. We're not doing any of that vegan stuff. We're having real meat at the wedding or whatever it is. So that's a good point. You keep it small, you pay for it yourself. Well, I guess you're calling the shots. Now,
yes.
Okay, this is one area I understand because I'm an accountant. You mentioned you're looking at the revenue and the expenses is what you were describing, an income statement, a cash flow. So, okay, I've got this much in assets I can contribute. I got this much in my savings, whatever. My parents are going to kick in this, whatever. The other element that you didn't mention is, well, we're going to put a box at the front of the hall there, and each of the guests is going to drop an envelope in because that's how it works today, if I understand correctly. It's unusual that you bring a toaster to the wedding. It's more likely that you're going to write a check, or I don't know. That's how I did it at the weddings I went to, but maybe you do.
There are lots of electronic means.
I figured there must be. Yes. I'm not that sophisticated. I guess people are doing it with Bitcoin or something. The Bitcoin wedding. That'll be your next book, The Bitcoin Wedding.
Oh my goodness.
But okay, so when I'm doing this analysis, should I be saying to myself, well, on average, a guest is going to kick in X number of dollars. Do I factor that into my budget, or would it be safer to say, no, pay for it all up front, don't count on that?
I would not base any sort of financial decisions that you're making based on expectations of what you're going to receive as a gift, because that's just not guaranteed at the end of the day. The economy is in a bit of a state right now. People's budgets are tight. They might be tightening up their belts and stuff. And so you just can't rely on that at the end of the day. Yes, you will get gifts, but I never encourage couples to, consider that in terms of like, oh, well, we'll make this money back in gifts. But there is a huge increase in the popularity of, couples want cash. They want monetary gifts versus those tangible items that used to be very popular in the past, like, fine china and place settings and things like that. They're becoming more and more keen to set up even like a home down payment fund for their wedding registry, or, a honeymoon fund. There's websites like Honey Fund specifically for that, where you can kind of allocate the cash that your guests contribute towards different life goals, whether it's a honeymoon or a home down payment or something else. So, yeah, all that to say, I do not recommend sort of going in with that expectation of a certain amount of gifts is going to help cover and offset the expenses that you're spending on the wedding itself.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Don't factor it in, and then you don't have to worry about it. And I agree with you. China isn't a thing anymore.
No.
Right? I mean, the country
it's beautiful
is,
if someone in your family wants to pass it down to you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so meaningful, but I don't think that that's something that most couples are registering for these days.
Well, and I suspect, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you're more likely to get married when you're younger than when you're older. And you're just starting out, in other words. And so that probably means we're going to get married and we're going to live in a small apartment as opposed to a big mansion. Mm-hmm. And so certainly if you're in a big city like Toronto or something, or New York or whatever, okay, I'm living in a small place. I do not have room for a 12-piece set of, bone china or whatever the thing is.
Nobody has a china cabinet anymore either. Yeah.
So as a result, that's just not a thing. And if we've already been living together for a bit, we probably already have a toaster.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
The cash then becomes the obvious answer then.
Cash is king,
cash
as
is
they
king,
say.
baby. Yep.
And I was also going to mention, I think, these younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they were getting married a little bit later than in previous generations. And so they are a bit more established. They're working professionals. Often they live together before they get married. And so they don't need those like tangible items as much as they could use help getting their, first home purchased by funding a down payment.
So do you have any idea what the average age range is for a first marriage now? I mean, it's not 18 anymore.
It's certainly not. I don't have that statistic off the top of my head, but I think it's inching closer between 25 and 30.
That would make sense. So, well, on this show, we just make stuff up anyways. So long as you say it with conviction, then we are going to believe it. 30 years old.
I try to be accurate.
No, we appreciate that. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you another question that you won't have an answer to either, and that is back to the whole guest thing. So if I'm going to a wedding and it's going to be, let's call it a traditional wedding. There's going to be a service. There's going to be a big banquet or whatever you call it at the end, a reception. So how much should I be putting in that envelope, cash-wise?
It's so interesting. I think it really depends on the area that you live in and what sort of like expectations and standards are. It's really interesting to me because, like, say in the Northeast in the US, like New York, New Jersey, there's this very much this expectation of you want to give a gift to the couple an amount that's like equivalent to what they're spending like per head per guest, and trying to calculate that can be difficult on the guest side. So my advice to anyone who's like trying to figure out how much money to give as a gift for a wedding is to consider like how close you are in relationship to the couple. B, also like your financial situation. Like, don't overextend yourself to give a gift. Give what you feel is appropriate and what you feel comfortable and like appropriate for yourself and your personal situation. Weddings are expensive and it's definitely something to keep in mind. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think anyone should feel pressured to give a gift that is more, out of reach for themselves financially.
Yeah, but that sounds like a good ballpark thing. It's like, okay, well, if they're going to be spending X number of dollars on me, then at the very least, I don't want them going in the hole. But you're right. If I have limited means, then, I give what I can. And presumably the person who's inviting me to the wedding knows whether I've got lots of money or not so much money. And they're probably more interested in having me there than turning a profit on this deal.
Right. Your presence is a present in itself. And gifts, like I mentioned, like should never be expected per se, but obviously it is tradition to give something. And so give what you're able and give what feels right to you.
Now let's say that I don't have a lot of money and my friend is getting married and I want to, be a part of it. is there any way I could say to my friend, look, I don't have a lot of money. I'm finishing school, whatever, but I'd really like to help out in whatever way I can. I'm going to give you a gift, but is there anything else I can do? Can I help out at the pre-reception party? Can I don't know, like, is there anything you could do on that front, do you think?
I mean, I definitely think it's worth exploring with the couple. Every relationship, every dynamic between friends or family is different. So again, I think it's all about open communication and talking to them. And if you're close, they're going to be understanding. And more often than not, I think couples are definitely open to assistance in other areas, especially if their budget is tight. I think one thing that we see a lot with the couples who submit their weddings and that we publish on our website, which I should mention on the budgetsavvybride.com, we have a whole gallery of real weddings that you can sort by budget. And so you can see how couples, they share a full budget breakdown. So you can see how they spent the money that they spent on their wedding, which can be really helpful, especially if you're working with a limited budget. And so couples in those situations are always more than happy to have help from their family members or friends or guests, whether it's, having a family member bake your wedding cake for you so you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on that, or designing your wedding invitations, or arranging your flowers, or helping with setup or tear down so you don't have to pay for extra staff. I think every couple and situation is different, and it's all about like what feels best to you and to your guests, and depending on those relationships.
Cool. So those are things to think through. Okay, so I guess back to the real question, which is, okay, give me some ways then that I can, I don't want to call it cut costs, but be as efficient as possible when it comes to the cost of my wedding. So what pops into your head is some things I should be thinking about?
Well, first and foremost, always is examining your guest list. And basically, the number of guests you invite is the biggest thing that's going to impact the cost of your wedding. Every guest you invite is another, invitation, another chair, another place setting, another meal, another, bar package if you're having an open bar. These are all things that just exponentially add up for, every time you add an additional guest. So really keeping your guest list as tight as you can, while still including the people who are most important to you, is going to be the best way to keep control of those costs across the board. But, there's areas to save in every different aspect of the wedding, whether it's, flowers. One of the areas that I think couples often have sticker shock about are the costs of fresh flowers. They're often flown in from other countries. There's costs involved in that. And they've increased, especially like post 2020. And so, there are some great alternatives for things like that. You can use silk flowers. There's some great companies that actually do silk flower arrangements that you can rent. They ship them to you and you can set them up and use them. They are stunning, beautiful. They even are scented to smell like fresh flowers. They look incredible in photos. No one will ever know the difference. And you're going to save like 70% off the cost of fresh flowers. And one of the companies that I personally love is called Something Borrowed Blooms. And I think they also ship to Canada. So that should be relevant to like your audience. But, all across the board, there's alternatives you can find to kind of cut back depending on the areas of your wedding that are important to you or not.
And which goes back to what you said earlier. Well, you make a budget and you go through and you'll see pretty quickly that cutting down the guest list is where the big savings are. So let's say I got a big family and lots of people and they all want to come, but I can't afford it. So is there any way that I can kind of do like a either pre or post wedding party? So the wedding is going to be small for a limited number of people, but then we're going to, I don't know, do something later when we get back from our honeymoon or something. And, everyone can come over or whatever. And you don't have to bring a gift and it's not going to be as fancy. Is there any way you can game it that way, or is that a horrible suggestion?
Not a horrible suggestion at all. I think couples, like I said, are feeling more permission to do things their own way, and they still want to celebrate with the people who matter most to them, but maybe just aren't in a financial position to throw an event for all of those people on like a professionally executed level, because hiring professionals does cost more than doing things yourself. So, if you want to have a small elopement or micro wedding with just your closest, nearest and dearest folks, and then have a backyard barbecue where you celebrate with your larger community, I think that's amazing. And I think when you have a large group of loved ones and people who care about you and want to support you, they're going to show up for you in whatever way that you allow them to. So I definitely think it's possible to have the best of both worlds and encourage, couples to do that.
Yeah, because one of the things about a wedding is you end up seeing people you haven't seen for a while. So, your cousin, your great aunt, whatever, well, you don't see them all the time. This is an excuse to get together. And I love the backyard barbecue idea, not so much in like February or March in the sections of the country we're in, but seasonally though, it would definitely work. So that makes perfect sense. What's your opinion on what they call destination weddings? Where we're going to fly to, I don't know, Barbados or something. What do you think of that?
I mean, amazing romantic sort of experience for the couple. I think there's a common misconception in the industry that destination weddings are more affordable. I would say that they can be if you are keeping that guest list small, but when you're having to factor in, flights and extended stays in hotels, like there are certain, ways that it can be more affordable if your guest list is small, but if everybody is game to show up, then it could, actually not be that much of a savings. So it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And I guess if I'm saying to my, my best man, hey, you got to pay for a plane ticket to fly to wherever we're going and stay in a hotel for 3 nights. It's like, okay, that's really putting a big cost on them. I guess the other way to look at it, though, is that's the perfect excuse to keep the guest list small.
It really is. It definitely will self-eliminate people who aren't willing to spend that money to travel, which I think, can be, to your benefit, because then you're not the ones like nixing people from the list and it's not personal. But, at the end of the day, it depends on every couple. And, I also, going back to the conversation about, gifting and things like that, like if you're asking people to shell out all this money to travel and celebrate with you, like the gift level might not be as large as a result as well. Not that that's something you should, count on anyway, but it's just something to kind of keep in mind and consider.
Yeah, if you had to pay all that money for the plane ticket, you're not also going to be giving me a big chunk of my down payment probably too. And what's the current, how does it work now? Because back, like I said, 28 years ago when I got married, the guys, what do you call the guys who stand up with the groom there?
The groomsmen.
The groomsmen, thank you. And then the bridesmaids would be on the other side. So you'd either, go to the tux rental store and rent a tux. That was kind of how it was done then. I guess the other way to do it is, well, everybody wear a suit or something, and then you don't have to rent it if you've already got one. Now, when I'm an accountant, and my guys, I believe, were all accountants, so we all had suits. So I think it worked out great. Everybody wear your suit. It's all cool. What's the tradition now then? How does clothing work these days? And I'm not talking just about the bride and the groom, but the other people.
Yeah, the wedding party.
Wedding party. So you know all these terms. I don't know these words. That's why we've got you here.
They don't call me a wedding expert.
I understand. So tell me about the wedding party and clothes then.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is, first of all, I think, leaning into that like non-traditional, like more modern approach to weddings, we're seeing couples with like mixed gender wedding parties. There might be bridesmen and groomswomen as well. So that also reflects kind of like the attire choices. And in years past and decades past, we saw this kind of like clone look where you have like an army of bridesmaids wearing all the exact same dress and the same color, the same hairstyle, and they all just look like clones. And I think today's couples are taking a more like relaxed approach to those attire choices. We're seeing, the brides and the grooms giving their wedding party sort of license to say like, oh, this is kind of our general color scheme. Pick a dress in the color that you like guys, like pick a gray suit or whatever. Doesn't have to be any particular brand or any particular exact style. And I think that gives your wedding party freedom too, because it gives them the ability to choose, an outfit that's within their personal budget, depending on what they want to spend, or maybe they have something already that works for them and they don't have to spend that money. So I love that kind of more like laid back approach that couples are taking. And I think it benefits the wedding parties as well. And at the end of the day, these people are your closest friends. You don't want to put this like huge burden on them. I think in years past, bridesmaids dresses, you could only get them at like a traditional bridal salon. You'd have to order them months and months in advance. You have to have them altered, and they would cost $300. That's a lot of money to ask someone to spend on a dress they're going to wear once. It was usually taffeta or like some sort of shiny satin that like no one's ever going to wear that again. And I think today's couples are a lot more mindful of wanting to allow their wedding parties to choose something that they feel comfortable in, that they like, that they could reasonably potentially wear again. And there's a lot more affordable options now as well that even ship within a week. So it's just a lot more accessible thanks to technology and e-commerce and all of these things.
Yeah, and you don't have to have the whole bridal party standing up there at the front with you. You get up the front, they all stand back, so it doesn't matter if we're not all, looking like Barbie dolls or whatever it is you're describing there. So, okay, so final question for you then, and you've given a whole bunch of really practical stuff, so this is fantastic. Is there anything else on the cost saving side that we haven't hit on? You mentioned keeping the guest list small. You talked about flowers. We've talked about clothes. Is there any other obvious things that we've missed?
So one of the areas I think that couples also like grapple with a lot is the alcohol situation, like your bar. That can be a huge cost, for the overall celebration, right? Like providing your guests with cocktails or libations to like party. And so one thing that I really recommend to couples is like, don't feel like you have to provide a full open bar. At the end of the day, like these people are coming to celebrate you. Of course, you want them to have a good time, but by offering, even just beer, wine, and maybe a signature cocktail or two, you and your partner can each choose your favorite cocktail to serve as like a signature cocktail. You're not giving them access to like a full, open bar situation. That can be a good way to kind of keep a handle on that, alcohol bill for sure.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think the weddings that I went to over the last few months, the whatever you call it in between the wedding and when the show starts.
Cocktail hour.
Cocktail. Thank you. See, I'm learning all sorts of stuff. I believe at one of them.
You'll be an expert.
I will. Absolutely. At one of them, they had, here's the cocktail. And I think it was a champagne or something. And so that's what they're all serving. Everyone's getting the same thing. It was great. None of us had to think about what we were getting. And then, prior to the meal or after the meal, during the dancing, whatever, then they've got the bar. But you're right. Alcohol is very expensive. Think about it in advance. And you can let your guests know in advance. Here's the deal, guys. We're having champagne during cocktail hour. We're going to have, beer and wine afterwards. There'll be wine with dinner, and that's what we're having. So everyone knows going in what the deal is. So
yeah, and if they know ahead of time, they can always bring a sneaky little flask in their bag if they want.
There you go. Now, do you sell branded flasks at thebudgetsavvybride.com? That's what I want to know. So we
do not personally, but we probably have affiliate partners.
There's a tip for you. So there you go. So the website is thebudgetsavvybride.com. And I'm going to put links to all this in the show notes. The podcast is called the Bouquet Toss Podcast. So There are two U's in the word bouquet. I did not know that. And you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Again, I'll put links to it. YouTube, just go to The Budget Savvy Bride and you'll see it. My favorite episode was episode 66, by the way. Marriage or Mortgage. You remember that episode? Marriage or Mortgage. You had a house expert on as the guest. So you want a deep dive on that topic, which we addressed briefly, then again, I'll put a link to episode number 66.
It was a great conversation for sure.
Yeah, it was, and practical again. And Jessica's book is called The Budget Savvy Wedding Planner and Organizer. Again, I'm going to put a link. There you go. You can see it on screen for those watching on YouTube. I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to put a link to Amazon.ca. You can get it through her website as well, but it might take you to Barnes & Noble or something that doesn't exist here in the frozen north. When I looked at it this morning, $17 Canadian for the paperback, less than $7 for the Kindle edition. There's also a fancier spiral bound edition and whatever. So check that out. And then Savvy Bride on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it today. And again, I'll put some links in the show notes to some of those things. Is there anything else we need to direct people to, Jessica, other than those things?
I mean, we're on all the major social platforms. So Instagram, we're doing a little bit of TikTok these days, trying to get out there. So, but yeah, we just love sharing practical advice, showing couples ways that they can still have a beautiful wedding within whatever budget they have. So there's just tons of resources on the website to share.
And what's the TikTok name? Is it Savvy Bride or The Budget Savvy Bride, or do you know?
Budget Savvy Bride.
Budget Savvy Bride on TikTok.
They had room for the full name.
Perfect. Yeah, because every social media is different. So that's fantastic. I'll put a link to that as well. We've got stuff on TikTok, but I don't understand it, so I never talk about it. It's above my head. So okay, well that's fantastic, Jessica. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So that is thebudgetsavvybride.com. Links in all the show notes. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, you guys know the deal. You put all the links and the notifications and the buttons and everything, and you'll get this show every Saturday morning. So please like and subscribe. Again, our show is also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those things. So links to the show notes for everything Jessica and I talked about. So thanks for listening and watching. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30. Or in this case, 35 minutes, but hey, who's counting? Who's counting? No, that was good. I appreciate that.
I just gave so much.
That's right.
It had
That's
to go
right.
long.
Absolutely. Well, but that was practical stuff though. And those are things that, okay, yeah, the guest list. Yeah, that's obvious. Of course, you keep that small and it will be less. And that I can see that as being the tension that, well, but